Her body hit the icy river like a sack of stones, hands bound tight with coarse rope behind her back. Dead weight. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thorne barked from the bank, his voice a blade cutting through the mountain air. The elite recruits erupted in laughter, leaning in to watch the inevitable panic. They all expected her to thrash and scream until the frigid current stole her breath. But what happened next would freeze the blood in every man's veins, challenging everything they thought they knew about strength. Before I tell you how those laughs turned into screams of terror, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The scene is set at a remote Special Operations Selection course, deep in the unforgiving wilderness of the Nevada mountains. The air itself was thin and sharp, smelling of pine and cold stone. Sunlight, brilliant and indifferent, sliced through the canopy of ancient trees, casting a dappled, nervous light on the churning surface of the river. It was fed by snow melt from the peaks above, and its waters were a breathtaking, brutal cold. A shock to the system so profound it could stop a heart. Jagged, moss-slicked rocks littered the riverbed, creating treacherous undercurrents that could snag a limb and hold a man under. This wasn't a training pool. It was a test orchestrated by nature itself, and Thorne was merely its cruel master of ceremonies. He paced the muddy bank, his boots crunching on loose gravel, a sadistic smirk etched onto his weathered face. "Listen up," he roared, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "The river doesn't care about your medals or your run times. It only weeds out the weak. Read here is today's lesson. Don't end up like her." The recruits, a gallery of hardened soldiers, chuckled and jeered. For weeks, they had whispered about Major Evelyn Eve Reed. She didn't fit. Her uniform was always too clean, her posture too precise, her silence mistaken for timid fear. They saw a 30-year-old woman in a world of hardened men and made their assumptions. Some started a quiet betting pool on how long she'd last before the safety divers had to pull her limp body out. Others, a silent few, looked away, their own discomfort a quiet protest they dared not voice. Eve felt their stares like a physical weight as the rough rope bit into the skin of her wrists and ankles. Thorne cinched the final knot with a vicious tug, his knuckles brushing her back. "Enjoy the swim," he sneered, his breath hot and foul. Then, with a shove, she was airborne. The impact was a full-body explosion of cold. It drove the air from her lungs in a single, silent gasp. The world of sound, the laughter, the roaring river, Thorne's taunts, was instantly erased, replaced by a muffled, subaquatic hum. Down she went, the current grabbing her, tumbling her like a doll in its powerful grip. Darkness and pressure enveloped her. But amidst the chaos, a strange calm descended. Her mind, instead of panicking, became preternaturally clear. The cold was a familiar enemy. It pulled her back across 2 decades to a swollen river in Montana. She was 12, her leg caught on a submerged branch, the current ripping the world away. She had seen the panicked faces of her friends on the bank, their laughter turning to horror. She had felt the burning in her lungs, the surrender. And then she heard her father's voice, not as a memory, but as a living command in her mind. "Panic kills faster than water, Evie. Control your breath. Control your mind. The water is just water." She had survived then. This was no different. Eve opened her eyes. Bubbles streamed from her lips in a slow, controlled trickle. She tucked her chin to her chest, conserving oxygen. Her heart, which should have been hammering against her ribs, beat with a slow, steady rhythm. She was counting the beats, not the seconds. On the bank, the laughter had died. An uneasy silence was spreading through the ranks of recruits. The surface of the river remained unervingly calm, broken only by the relentless current. "Where is she?" a soldier muttered. Thorne folded his thick arms, his smirk tightening. "She's done," he grunted, though a flicker of doubt entered his eyes for the first time. At the far end of the clearing, Captain Leo Vance stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the water. He held a ruggedized tablet, its screen glowing faintly. He wasn't watching for failure. He was observing something else entirely, his stylus making small, precise notes. He was measuring the time between heartbeats, the seconds between breaths, waiting for the protocol to be confirmed. Beneath the surface, Eve's world had narrowed to three things: pressure, rhythm, and the voice of her father. The cold was a physical entity, a giant hand squeezing her chest, but her mind was a fortress. She ignored the fire building in her lungs and focused on the plan. She wasn't fighting the river. She was using it. With her legs bound, a powerful kick was impossible. Instead, she began a subtle, undulating motion, a dolphin-like movement that used her core and the water's own momentum. It was inefficient, but it gave her a sliver of control. Bob, sip, sink. That was the mantra. She contorted her body, forcing her head to break the surface for a fraction of a second, stealing a single, desperate sip of air before the current pulled her under again. There was no splash, no struggle, just a ghost at the surface, then gone. Up above, the recruits were shifting on their feet, their bravado evaporating into the cold mountain air. The disturbing calm of the river was more terrifying than any scream would have been. "What the hell is she doing?" one asked, his voice barely a whisper. Another shook his head. "Nobody does that. You fight, or you drown." Thorne's face had gone from smug to stony. This wasn't following the script. Every other soldier he'd put through this drill had fought like a caged animal, wasting their energy in a frantic, useless struggle against the ropes and the water. That panic was the point of the exercise, to break them mentally. But Eve wasn't breaking. She was thinking. The stillness stretched taut, a wire of tension vibrating across the clearing, ready to snap. At the bottom of the riverbed, her back scraped against a large, flat rock. An anchor. This was her chance. Pinning herself against it to fight the current, she bent her knees, bringing her bound ankles as close to her body as possible. The knot Thorne had tied was a double overhand, designed to tighten under pressure. A prison of fiber. But Eve knew knots. Her father, a search and rescue specialist, had taught her that every knot has a weakness, a key. For this one, it was the outer loop. If she could create just a millimeter of slack, she could exploit it. She pressed her ankles together, then forced them apart, a grinding, repetitive motion. The coarse rope dug into her skin, tearing it raw. A flare of white-hot pain shot up her legs, but she welcomed it. Pain was a signal. It meant something was moving. Blood began to feather from the wounds, blooming like dark flowers in the clear water before being whisked away by the current. She ignored it, her entire being focused on that single point of pressure. Thorne was now standing at the very edge of the bank, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He'd seen Olympic swimmers and seasoned triathletes fail this test. They all thrashed. They all gave in to the primal fear. But the silence from the river was a direct challenge to his authority, to his entire philosophy of strength. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And then it happened. A subtle shift in the rope. Eve felt it more than she saw it. A slight release of tension around one ankle. The outer loop had slipped. The gap was infinitesimal, a mere crack in the fortress wall, but a crack was all she needed. Her lungs were screaming, black spots dancing at the edge of her vision. She drove her body upward one last time. Sip, sink. Now, with renewed purpose, she dragged her ankles toward her bound hands. Her fingers, numb with cold, scraped blindly across the rough fibers, shredding her knuckles. On the next cycle, her whole hand jammed into the tiny gap, twisting, prying with a raw, focused fury. The rope groaned in protest, its fibers straining. Then with a sudden, tearing snap, the outer loop gave way. One leg kicked free. A collective gasp ripped through the line of recruits. "No way," someone hissed. Another swore, a sharp, incredulous curse. One leg was free. It was supposed to be impossible. The entire dynamic of the test had just been shattered. Thorne took an involuntary step back, his face a mask of disbelief, the color draining from it. At the far end of the clearing, Captain Vance's stylus paused mid-stroke. A flicker of something, not surprise, but confirmation, crossed his features. Eve didn't waste the victory. The moment her leg was free, she curled her body, transforming the river from a prison into a launching pad. Her free foot found purchase on a submerged rock. With an explosive push, she drove herself diagonally toward the bank. She erupted from the water, not like a survivor, but like a predator. Her chest slammed against the muddy embankment. She pressed her boot into the soft earth, using the momentum to haul her upper body clear of the river's grasp. She collapsed onto the bank, half kneeling in the mud and gravel, water pouring from her uniform in silvery sheets. Her wrists were still bound tightly behind her back, one ankle still tethered by the ruined rope, but she was breathing, not gasping, not choking, but taking steady, deliberate breaths, her chest rising and falling with unnerving control. She had pulled herself out, alone. An absolute, deafening silence descended upon the clearing, heavier than the mountain air. Every recruit stared, their earlier laughter now a bitter memory they desperately wanted to disown. They had expected to see a broken victim, a body dragged ashore by divers. Instead, they were witnessing someone who had systematically dismantled an impossible situation, piece by painful piece. Eve slowly lifted her head. Her gray eyes, hard as flint, scanned their faces. She watched the sneers curdle into unease, the confidence hollow out into doubt. She saw them for what they were. Thorn, his face now pale and slack-jawed, took a half-step forward, his fists clenching and unclenching. The words of rage and denial died on his tongue. He had no framework for this, no explanation for what he had just seen. Then, Eve did something that broke the last vestiges of their reality. Still kneeling, she bent forward, fluidly rolling her shoulders in a motion of impossible flexibility. She brought her bound hands down, under her feet, and up in front of her body. With her hands now in front of her, she calmly set to work on the knot with her teeth and fingers. It fell away in seconds. The wet rope hit the gravel with a soft, final thud. It sounded louder than a gunshot in the silence. Captain Vance finally moved. He strode forward, his boots making decisive sounds against the rock. He stopped a respectful distance from Eve, holding his tablet at his side. His voice was sharp, clinical, and devoid of any emotion except official certainty. Nightshade protocol verified. The recruits stared blankly. The words meant nothing to them. But the captain's posture, the crisp finality of his tone, meant everything. He wasn't speaking to a failed recruit. He was speaking to a superior. He snapped to attention, his hand coming up in a perfect, rigid salute. Major Reed. Evaluation complete. The title detonated in the clearing. Major. The woman they had ridiculed, dismissed, and nearly drowned was their superior officer. Thorn staggered as if struck. This is a setup. A damn setup, he roared, his face twisting in a snarl of fury and humiliation. She cheated. She provoked me. Eve rose slowly to her full height. The waterlogged uniform couldn't hide the authority that now radiated from her like heat. She turned her head, her gaze cutting into Thorn with surgical precision. Her voice was low, calm, and utterly lethal. If weakness is enough to provoke your abuse, Sergeant, then you were unfit to lead before you ever opened your mouth. Thorn froze, his rage shattering against the iron wall of her words. He was stripped bare, his cruelty exposed not as strength, but as a pathetic flaw. Before he could stammer a response, Captain Vance's voice snapped through the air like a rifle shot. Gunnery Sergeant Thorn, effective immediately, you are suspended from all training authority. Report to command headquarters. Now, the order was absolute, stripping away the last shreds of Thorn's authority and swagger. He stood there for a moment, his jaw clenched, a man whose world had just been burned to the ground. He shot Eve a look of pure hatred, then shoved past her and stalked away, his retreat as pathetic as his earlier arrogance had been loud. As he passed, Eve leaned in, her voice a whisper meant only for him. It ended the moment you mistook cruelty for strength. His stride faltered, but he didn't look back. The recruits stood rigid, trapped in a state of shock. They didn't know whether to salute, to speak, or to simply try and vanish into the forest. Their entire understanding of the command structure, of power, of respect, had been inverted in a single, brutal afternoon. Eve let her eyes sweep across them. No longer the blank, invisible recruit, but a commander taking stock of her unit. Her gaze pinned each man in place, a silent reminder of every whispered insult, every dismissive laugh, every moment they thought no one important was listening. She said nothing. The silence was her weapon, and it was more powerful than any speech. Finally, Vance turned to the stunned assembly. "Attention!" he barked, his voice thundering with authority. "You are in the presence of Major Evelyn Reed, decorated combat operative, former Ghost Program officer, and your new commanding officer. You will address her and treat her as such." A wave of shock and dawning horror washed over the recruits. Some flinched as if physically struck. Faces went pale. They understood now. Every grueling march, every sleepless night, every ounce of humiliation had been a part of the test. But the true evaluation wasn't the obstacles. It was her. Their reaction to her perceived weakness was the real test. And most of them had failed spectacularly. Survival was never the final measure. Character was. Eve stepped forward, her boots whispering against the sun-baked concrete, water still dripping from her fatigues. She locked eyes with the formation. "I have watched you for 18 days, she said, her voice steady and sharp as a shard of ice. "Not your push-ups, not your ruck times. Your character. I watch how you treat those you believe to be powerless." Faces fell. The realization cut them to the core. Before the shame could fully settle, she raised a hand, pointing to 3 specific recruits in the formation. You, and you." The chosen men froze, their eyes wide with confusion. The others held their breath. On his tablet, Captain Vance made a final notation, his lips pressed into a thin, grim line. He knew exactly what was coming next. The physical drill was over. The true reckoning had just begun. These men were about to learn what it truly meant to be led, and what it meant to be worthy of leading others. This story isn't just about surviving an impossible test. It's a powerful revelation of a universal truth. A person's true character is not revealed when they're being watched by their superiors, but in the quiet moments when they hold power over someone they believe is beneath them. It's a stark reminder that true authority is never found in a rank or a title. It is earned through respect and proven by integrity. Have you ever profoundly underestimated someone based on a first impression or prejudice? What would you have thought, watching from that riverbank, as the mockery turned to stunned silence? Do you think people like Sergeant Thorne, who confuse cruelty with strength, are common in positions of power? And what is the best way to challenge them? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. We value every perspective. If this story about resilience, character, and true leadership resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that challenge our perceptions. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that respect is earned, not demanded, and that strength is shown in how we lift others up. We read every single comment, and your voice matters here. More stories about hidden strength and undercover truths are waiting for you on your screen right now. Click on one of them to watch next, and we'll see you tomorrow with another story that proves character is everything.